Sumerian tablets are probably one of the oldest form of written record that we have.
There is a clay tablet locked in a drawer beneath the British Museum that mainstream archaeology has been quietly avoiding for over a century. The diagrams carved into its surface do not match any sky chart on record. They appear to map a planet at the edge of our solar system that should not exist. A planet, a Bronze Age civilization described 5,000 years before any telescope was built. And every single time modern astronomy stumbles onto evidence that the planet might actually be there, NASA goes quiet, walks the story back, and changes the subject. This is why. Layard's drawer. The year is 1849. Austin Henry Layard, a young British archaeologist working in what is now northern Iraq, is digging through the collapsed remains of the Royal Library at Nineveh, an Assyrian city buried for over 2,000 years. Tablet after tablet comes up out of the rubble, most of them rectangular, most covered in administrative records, royal correspondence, the day-to-day paperwork of a long-dead empire. And then his hands close around something different. This piece is round, not a fragment of a larger square, round on purpose. Divided into segments like a pie, every segment crowded with cuneiform script wrapping around diagrams of dots, lines, and odd geometric arrangements that look nothing like the constellation charts of the period. Layard knows when something does not fit the catalog of the era. This does not fit. He crates it up with the rest of his finds and ships it back to London. The tablet eventually receives a museum number, K8538. Curators label it an astronomical text, file it in the basement, and for the better part of the next century, almost no one looks at it carefully. The cuneiform is difficult, the diagrams are unfamiliar, and the assumption running through ancient history departments at the time is that Bronze Age Mesopotamians could only record what their own eyes could see in the night sky. That assumption is about to get its first real test, and the man who will deliver it has not even been born yet, the outsider. Zecharia Sitchin is the kind of figure mainstream academia would have been more comfortable ignoring entirely. Russian-born, raised in mandatory Palestine, working for years as a journalist and economist, he was not credentialed in Assyriology, not employed by any university, not invited to any conferences. What he had was an obsession. He spent decades teaching himself ancient Sumerian and Akkadian, evening after evening, lexicon after lexicon, convinced the official translations had quietly smoothed the strange parts down into mythology, because the strange parts did not fit the story modern academia wanted to tell. In 1976, Sitchin published a book called The 12th Planet. He turned his attention to the small round tablet in London. He claimed K8538 was not a casual constellation map at all. He claimed it was a record of our entire solar system, drawn by people who should not have known what was in it. And he claimed the chart depicted a body modern astronomy still refuses to formally acknowledge a planet the Sumerians called Nibiru. His count, segment by segment, was a central object surrounded by smaller bodies. He read the central figure as the sun. He read the surrounding figures as planets. By his tally, the diagram showed 11 smaller bodies orbiting that central sun, plus a 12th body on a wide elliptical path that swung through the inner system only once every 3,600 years. That was the claim that lit the fuse. The reaction from mainstream archaeology was immediate and merciless. Sitchin, they said, was an amateur. His translations were unreliable. The diagram showed constellations, not planets. The British Museum's official position then and now is that K8538 represents the night sky over Mesopotamia around 650 BCE, nothing more. But here is where the dismissal starts to crack. The people who carved that tablet were not stargazing primitives. They were something else entirely, what the Sumerians actually knew. Now, you have to understand who we are talking about. The civilization that produced K8538 tracked the cycles of Venus with a precision that holds up against modern instruments. They calculated lunar eclipses centuries in advance. They divided the sky into 12 sections, the foundation of the zodiac you still read in the back of newspapers, and they recorded planetary motion using mathematical systems so advanced that scholars still argue about whether Bronze Age people should have been capable of producing them. They understood the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete one cycle. Modern astronomy did not formally lock that phenomenon down until comparatively recently. The Sumerians referenced it in writing thousands of years before any modern instrument confirmed it. They understood the Earth was a sphere. They produced multiplication tables, geometric proofs, and observational records, so accurate that later civilizations copied them across centuries because they kept proving correct. These were not people inventing stories about lights in the dark. These were the founders of recorded astronomy. So when modern academia says, with a straight face, that the Sumerians could not possibly have known about planets beyond the reach of the naked eye, a question naturally follows. If they were that careful, that disciplined, that mathematical, what else might they have known that we have not yet learned to recognize? 7 years after Sitchin opened that tablet, NASA's instruments would answer that question in a way nobody was ready for. The 1983 infrared signal. In January 1983, the United States launched the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, known as IRAS, in partnership with the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. It was the first space telescope built to scan the entire sky in infrared wavelengths, the part of the electromagnetic spectrum where cool, distant objects give off their faint heat signatures. Within months of going live, IRAS picked up something that should not have been there. On the 30th of December 1983, the Washington Post ran a story under a headline that has haunted astronomy ever since. The piece described a mystery heavenly body, possibly as large as Jupiter, detected in the outer reaches of the solar system. The article quoted Dr. Jerry Neugebauer, the chief IRAS scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Neugebauer, the man with the actual data on his desk, said the object might be a planet bigger than Jupiter, closer than the nearest star, and that it could be considered part of our solar system. Bigger than Jupiter, closer than the nearest star, unknown. This is the part of the story where most people start scrolling. The questions get uncomfortable. The official answers stop matching the data, and the easy thing is to look away. If you would rather not, if you want more deep dives into forbidden history and ancient mysteries that mainstream academia refuses to touch, hit subscribe right now. New investigations every week. Now stay with me, because what NASA did next is somehow stranger than what its satellite found. And then, almost immediately, the official position began to shift. Within weeks, follow-up observations were said to suggest the object was probably a distant galaxy, or maybe an ultra-cold brown dwarf far outside the solar system. NASA released clarifications. The story was walked back. The original wording, possibly part of our solar system, quietly disappeared from the official line, replaced by the more comfortable conclusion that nothing unusual had been found. But look at the timing. 7 years after Sitchin published a book claiming the Sumerians knew of a massive planet on a long elliptical orbit at the edge of our solar system, NASA's first all-sky infrared survey detected a massive, unexplained object in the exact region where such a body would have to exist. The official explanation might be correct, but the coincidence has never sat comfortably with anyone who has read both stories side by side. Planet 9 enters the conversation. Fast forward to 2016. Two astronomers at the California Institute of Technology, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, published peer-reviewed research arguing that something massive was hiding in the outer solar system. They had not seen it directly. What they had seen was its gravitational fingerprint, a strange clustering in the orbital paths of the icy objects that drift beyond Neptune in the Kuiper Belt. Those objects were not behaving the way they should. Something was pulling on them, herding them into specific configurations that no known body could account for. Batygin and Brown ran the math. Their calculations predicted a planet roughly 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting the Sun at a distance somewhere between 400 and 800 astronomical units, with an orbital period stretching to between 10,000 and 20,000 years. They called it Planet 9. The name stuck. The research was peer-reviewed, published in respected journals, and embraced by mainstream astronomy as a serious hypothesis. A massive planet, an impossibly long orbit, exactly where the Sumerians said something was waiting. The Caltech team did not cite Sitchin. They did not mention the Sumerians. They did not need to. They arrived at the same fundamental conclusion through entirely modern methods. There is a large undiscovered planet in the far reaches of our solar system, and we cannot yet see it. So why is Planet 9 treated as cutting-edge astronomy while Nibiru is dismissed as pseudoscience, when the basic claim, an undiscovered massive body on a long orbit far from the Sun, is functionally the same? The official answer is methodology. Batygin and Brown used gravitational modeling, statistical analysis, peer review. Sitchin used contested translations, and a framework academia rejects. Fair enough. But that distinction does not erase the deeper question that has refused to go away for 50 years. How did a culture that emerged 5,000 years ago in southern Mesopotamia describe, in writing, what modern astronomy is only just beginning to confirm? Because there is a second artifact, and it is somehow stranger than the first. The second artifact, K8538, is not the only piece of evidence in this argument. In the 19th century, archaeologists working in Mesopotamia recovered hundreds of small stone cylinders called cylinder seals, rolled across wet clay to leave impressions, used as signatures and identification marks. One of those seals, catalogued as VA 243 and now housed at the Vorderasiatisches Museum in Berlin, became the centerpiece of Sitchin's second argument. The seal shows a star in the upper left section of its design, surrounded by 11 smaller spheres. Sitchin claimed it was a depiction of the solar system. The central star, he said, was the Sun. The 11 spheres around it were the known planets, plus Nibiru, plus several moons large enough to count as worlds in their own right. This is the moment the academic counter-argument gets serious, and it deserves to be heard. Dr. Michael Heiser, a credentialed scholar of ancient Semitic languages, sat down with Sitchin's body of work and went through it line by line. He spent years on it. Heiser argued, with substantial textual evidence, that the cuneiform term Sitchin, rendered as Nibiru, most often referred to Jupiter, not a hidden 10th planet. He pointed to outdated lexicons in Sitchin's source material. He flagged specific passages where Sitchin's reading collided with the broader corpus of Mesopotamian astronomy. On VA 243 specifically, Heiser concluded that the central symbol was a deity figure, not the sun, and that there was no defensible astronomical reading of the seal. Heiser was not a hack. His work was meticulous, and any honest engagement with this story has to put it on the table. But step back from the specific argument over VA 243 and watch what happens at the level of pattern. Whenever an ancient artifact appears to depict something unexpectedly advanced, the default academic response is symbolism. If a Sumerian carving resembles a solar system, it is a religious icon. If a clay tablet shows what looks like planetary orbits, it is a constellation map. The interpretive door is closed before the evidence has finished arriving. That instinct may be right in many cases, but applied uniformly, it begins to look less like cautious scholarship and more like a habit of looking away. And the Sumerian record contains a great deal more to look at. The Anunnaki question. Sitchin did not stop at the tablet. He went further, and this is the part that makes serious people nervous. He claimed the Sumerians knew about Nibiru because beings from Nibiru had told them. According to his reading of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, Nibiru collided in the distant past with a primordial planet called Tiamat. The collision split Tiamat in half. One half became the Earth. The other half became the asteroid belt. The inhabitants of Nibiru, the Anunnaki, in Sumerian, arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago and genetically engineered early humans to work in their gold mines. Mainstream scholars dismiss the entire framework. The Enuma Elish, they argue, is mythological poetry, not a history book. The Sumerian texts do not describe spacecraft, genetic engineering, or interplanetary travel. The Anunnaki, in the actual cuneiform record, are gods who descended from the heavens. Sitchin, the critics say, retrofitted 20th century concepts onto texts that were never written to support them. That criticism is fair, as far as it goes. But here is what the criticism does not erase. The Sumerian civilization itself appears in the historical record almost without warning, around 4,500 BCE, in a region with no clear precursor culture capable of producing what the Sumerians produced almost immediately: writing, mathematics, astronomy, codified law, large-scale agriculture, urban planning. It shows up essentially fully formed. Then there is the Sumerian king list, an ancient text cataloging the rulers of Sumer. It opens with the line that kingship was lowered from heaven. It lists 8 pre-flood kings whose individual reigns last 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 43,200 years. After the flood, the reigns shorten dramatically until they match plausible human lifespans. Mainstream history reads it as straightforward myth. Ancient astronaut theorists read it as a fossilized memory of a time when something other than humans held authority on this planet. And the flood itself shows up across continents that should not have shared the story. The Sumerians had Utnapishtim, the Hebrews had Noah, the Greeks had Deucalion, the Hindus had Manu, the Chinese had Gunyu, and Native American and Australian Aboriginal traditions describe the same catastrophic rising water. Either the human imagination is more uniform across cultures than seems likely, or something happened that was real enough to be remembered everywhere. The gold question. And get this, researcher Michael Tellinger, working out of southern Africa, has spent decades documenting what he describes as ancient gold mining infrastructure scattered across the Witwatersrand region. Some of these sites, he argues, date back tens of thousands of years, predating any conventionally accepted complex civilization in the area. His interpretation is that the mines are physical evidence of the labor operations described in Sumerian texts. Mainstream archaeologists reject the dating and the framework. The mines, they argue, were operated by early human societies using copper and stone tools. Impressive in scale, yes. Impossible without alien help? No. But Tellinger leaves a question hanging. The Atrahasis, another Sumerian text, describes the lesser gods complaining about the unbearable labor of digging canals and mining. The god Enki proposes a solution. Create a primitive worker to take over the labor. The goddess Ninhursag, working with Enki, mixes the clay of the earth with the blood of a slain god to produce the first humans. Read as religious metaphor, it is a creation myth. Read with modern eyes, swapping clay for genetic material and gods for advanced beings. It begins to sound like something else entirely. Modern genetics has only added new layers to that argument. In 2010, researchers confirmed that modern humans carry small but measurable percentages of DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans, 2 extinct hominid lineages that interbred with our ancestors. That alone reshaped the family tree. Roughly 90% of human DNA was once labeled junk non-coding sequences with no clear function. Mainstream geneticists have since shown that much of it plays regulatory roles, but the redundancy and complexity of the human genome continues to puzzle the field, and the lack of a clean fossil sequence between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens remains a gap the standard story has not fully closed. None of that proves intervention, but it leaves room for the question to keep being asked. And that question is exactly the one NASA has been carefully not answering for decades. What NASA will and will not say. NASA's official position on Nibiru has been consistent and emphatic. There is no evidence, the agency states, of a hidden 10th planet on a collision course with Earth. In 2012, as doomsday theories tied to the Mayan long count calendar spread online, NASA released a formal statement debunking what it called the Planet X hoax. The statement noted that any planet large enough and close enough to threaten Earth would already be visible to amateur astronomers and would be causing measurable gravitational disturbances throughout the solar system. But there is a catch. That statement is technically accurate for the specific scenario it addresses. A massive planet on an imminent approach to Earth would, in fact, be detectable. But the Sumerian description of Nibiru and Sitchin's elaboration of it never claimed the planet was about to collide with anything. The claim was that its orbit kept it in the far outer solar system for the vast majority of its 3,600-year cycle, and that its passes through the inner system were rare events separated by millennia. A planet on a long elliptical orbit, currently nowhere near its inner system pass, would not be visible to amateur astronomers. It would not be causing detectable disturbances inside the orbit of Neptune. NASA's denial of an imminent threat, and the question of whether such a body exists at all in the far reaches of the solar system, are not the same question. Read carefully. The agency is answering one and ignoring the other. And in 2020, the conversation got stranger still. The black hole hypothesis. In 2020, Two researchers connected to the University of Michigan, working on related theoretical models, suggested that the gravitational signatures attributed to Planet 9 might not come from a planet at all. They proposed that the source could be a primordial black hole, a relic from the early universe, perhaps the size of a grapefruit, but with a mass several times that of Earth. Read that again. A grapefruit, with the mass of 5 Earths, effectively invisible. Such an object would reflect no light. It would emit no detectable thermal radiation in the way a normal planet would. But its gravitational influence on the orbits of distant Kuiper Belt objects would match the observations exactly. If that hypothesis turns out to be correct, the picture becomes stranger than anyone wants to admit out loud. The Sumerians called the body the planet of the crossing. Modern astronomers call it Planet 9. Some researchers now suggest it might not be a planet in any conventional sense at all. The label is not the point. The point is that something out there is pulling on objects in the outer solar system in ways we cannot fully explain, in the precise region where a 5,000-year-old civilization wrote that something was waiting. The larger pattern. Set aside the translation debates. Set aside Sitchin's credentials. Look only at the converging facts. A Sumerian tablet, recovered in 1849, depicts a circular diagram with cuneiform annotations describing celestial bodies. A 1,976 reading of that tablet claims it shows a solar system with a distant 12th body. A 1,983 NASA infrared survey detects an unexplained massive object in the outer solar system, then walks the discovery back. A 2016 Caltech study concludes, on completely independent grounds, that a massive undiscovered planet must exist in the same region. A 2020 follow-up suggests the source might be even more exotic than a planet. That is not proof of ancient astronauts. It is not proof of Anunnaki. It is not proof that K8538 is what Sitchin said it was, but it is a pattern. And the pattern is that every time modern astronomy looks carefully at the outer reaches of the solar system, something turns up that the Sumerians appear to have already described in writing. Read carefully. The dismissals against Sitchin have always been about method, never about the data point at the end of the chain. The translations may be wrong, the credentials may be lacking. None of that explains why the gravitational evidence keeps pointing at the same place. None of it explains why, in 1983, the chief IRAS scientist at JPL went on the record describing an object that could be considered part of our solar system before NASA quietly walked it back. None of it explains why two of the most respected astronomers in the field, in 2016, published peer-reviewed math arriving at the same basic claim. The Caltech team has acknowledged that confirming Planet 9 through direct observation could take years, possibly decades. The object is so faint and so distant that even the most powerful telescopes have to know precisely where to look, and the search area is vast. Until direct imaging arrives, the body's existence remains an inference drawn from gravitational mathematics, the same kind of inference, in a sense, that Sitchin claimed the Sumerians had drawn from whatever source they used. The drawer is still open. K8538 is still in London, still catalogued as an astronomical reference text. The British Museum has not changed its official description. Tour groups walk past the Mesopotamian collection without ever being told that one of its most controversial objects has spent 40 years at the center of a debate about humanity's place in the universe. The questions have not been answered. They have only gotten quieter. The Sumerian civilization still appears in the historical record without an adequate precursor. The flood myths still cluster around the same basic event across cultures that should not have shared one. The gravitational anomalies in the outer solar system still demand an explanation. And somewhere out there, hidden in the cold dark beyond Neptune, something is still pulling on the orbits of distant icy bodies in ways modern astronomy is still trying to model. Maybe NASA's eventual telescopes will find the body and call it Planet 9 and credit modern astronomy with the discovery. Maybe the source will turn out to be a primordial black hole, and the headlines will be even stranger. Or maybe nothing direct will ever be found, and the gravitational clustering will be explained away by a refined model that no longer requires a hidden mass at all. But if it does turn up, the question that follows is the one nobody on the official side wants to answer out loud. How did the Sumerians know? How did a Bronze Age civilization, with no telescopes, no spacecraft, no instrumentation more advanced than careful eyes and clay tablets, describe an object that is only now becoming visible in the data of the most sophisticated astronomy ever practiced? The forbidden Sumerian star chart is not forbidden because it is fake. It is uncomfortable because it might be real. And if it is real, the textbook version of who we are, where we came from, and what we have always known stops being the only version on the table. The clay is still there. The cuneiform is still there. The annotations Sitchin pointed to are still there, sitting in a drawer beneath one of the most famous museums in the world, waiting for the next generation of researchers willing to look at them without flinching. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. New deep dives into forbidden history and ancient mysteries, every week the kind of investigations mainstream academia will not touch. Up next, the Baghdad Battery and the evidence of working electricity in ancient Mesopotamia thousands of years before it was supposed to exist. Click it now and let me know in the comments. Do you think the Sumerians figured it out on their own, or were they taught?